Did the Supreme Court just hand Donald Trump a major victory? Now, that's the distinct impression you'd probably get from most media coverage on this, but it's not really true. So in this video, we're going to discuss exactly what happened at the Supreme Court with respect to this case involving deportations and Donald Trump's invocation of that 1798 law, the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this all got started when Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act in order to give himself all kinds of wartime powers and authority to round people up and to deport them to El Salvador with no due process. Now, when that happened, lawyers representing some of the deportees challenged the administration's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, saying that Donald Trump doesn't have any authority to invoke and implement that act because it doesn't apply. Because it only applies in times of a declared war. And we're not in a war. It also applies under certain other circumstances, none of which apply here either, or so the argument goes. Now, the exact merits of that argument we've already discussed, and I'll talk about later, but that's not at issue here because that's not what was at issue in this court case. So when the plaintiffs filed that lawsuit to try to block these deportations under the Alien Enemies Act, the judge immediately put a stay in place, a temporary restraining order essentially blocking the administration from any further use of that 1798 law while the court proceeded in hearing the merits of the case. The district court has not decided that issue yet. And by the way, there's a lot of controversy drummed up by the president over whether a district court judge even has authority to hear this case. Now, if you are going to challenge, if you're going to file any lawsuit at the federal level, you begin in district court. That's the trial court. So to say that a district court has no business getting involved is ridiculous. That's where you file all lawsuits at the federal level, at the district court. Now, if you lose, then you can appeal up to the circuit court and then ultimately up to the Supreme Court. But this idea that you can't go to a circuit court for a case like, a district court for a case like this is ridiculous. So it takes a while, right? Returning now to the case, it takes a while to litigate a case like this. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to play out in court, before a judge makes a ruling as to whether or not Trump can, in fact, invoke this law, he put a temporary hold on Trump invoking it. Just temporary. Now, I got allergies going on today, man. Spring is springing over here, baby. Anyway, so Donald Trump appealed that temporary stay to the circuit court. The circuit court upheld the lower court's decision in a 2-to-1 vote, keeping the stay in place. Donald Trump appealed that to the Supreme Court. That's what we got a decision on yesterday. So the court removed the stay and allowed Donald Trump to continue using the 1798 law to deport people. This is not an ultimate ruling on the merits. Neither the district court, nor the circuit court, nor the Supreme Court actually decided the issue of whether or not Donald Trump can legally invoke the Alien Enemies Act. All the court decided was that he can continue using it while this issue plays out in court. But he has to provide due process. He has to notify people who are the subject of these deportations that he's invoking this law against them, and he has to give them reasonable time to challenge their deportation in a court of law. So the court is saying, yes, you can continue invoking this law, but you have to provide due process. So really, Donald Trump lost in a sense, because the reason he was invoking this law was so that he could get around due process, that he can just pick them up, detain them and deport them without any due process, no court hearing. These people never get a chance to go in front of a judge. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You can continue using this law, but you have to let them see a judge. They have to be allowed to challenge their deportation. So Donald Trump really lost, but it's being spun as a big victory for Donald Trump because they said he can continue using the Alien Enemies Act. But even, as I say, it's kind of a loss for Trump, but even that's temporary because this is still going to go back through the courts. The district court will render its decision after after this issue is fully briefed and they have hearings. The judge will rule on this issue. The losing side will appeal to the circuit court, and the losing side there will probably appeal to the Supreme Court. So all of these courts are going to weigh in again. I don't know what the Supreme Court is ultimately going to do, but here's what I think they're going to do, because John Roberts is very concerned about Donald Trump ignoring court orders. I think he is desperately trying to avoid a situation where Donald Trump ignores an order of the Supreme Court. And I think he's going to go out of his way to play this game where he tries to get to the right outcome while also ruling in such a way that Donald Trump can claim victory. And that's what he did here. So he says that Donald Trump can continue invoking the Alien Enemies Act. So Donald Trump, says that this is a great victory for him, and pretty much all the media is saying this as well. But really, he's requiring that these subjects of deportation get due process. So he's getting to the right outcome, which is to say that these people must be afforded due process while also giving Donald Trump the ability to claim a victory. And in that way, maybe I think this is what John Roberts may be thinking. Maybe in that way, we can get to the right outcome without Donald Trump defying an order of the court. Now, ultimately, as I said, this issue will be decided on the merits. This is just a temporary order. And so we'll see if that's ultimately the strategy that John Roberts tries to get the court to go along with. But that's kind of what I think he might be up to here. Now, I want to show you how the media is covering this story. First, I'm going to read you a little bit of an article from CNN and then from Fox News, just to give you an idea of how this is being covered, specifically how Fox News lies to its audience, essentially. And really, CNN doesn't really get this very correct either, but what Fox News does is exactly what you would expect Fox News to do. So let's begin with this CNN article. There we go. Supreme Court allows Trump to enforce Alien Enemies Act for rapid deportations for now. This is the main headline that Donald Trump wants. Supreme Court allows Trump to enforce Alien Enemies Act. So Donald Trump hears that, his people hear that, pretty much everyone hears that, and thinks that Donald Trump won a big victory. But as you now know, that's not exactly so. So here's how they wrote it up. The Supreme Court on Monday allowed President Donald Trump to enforce the Alien Enemies Act for now, handing the White House a significant victory that will let immigration officials rely on a sweeping wartime authority to rapidly deport alleged gang members. Again, this really isn't correct. This is not a significant victory. It's a rhetorical victory. But really, the important thing from this is that the way Donald Trump was using this act to pick people up and deport them with no due process, he's not allowed to do anymore. So I don't know how you look at those facts and say that that is a significant victory. But, lots of times these reporters don't know what the hell they're talking about either. They just get the top line bullet point that Trump is allowed to continue using the Alien Enemies Act, and then they go write their story, oh, this is a big victory for Trump, when if they understood what was going on here, they'd see it really isn't. So, okay, let me continue here. The unsigned decision in the case, one of the most closely watched emergency appeals pending at the Supreme Court, lets Trump invoke the 1798 law to speed removals while litigation over the act's use plays out in lower courts. Correct, this is just a temporary order. The court stressed, here's the important part, The court stressed that going forward, people who are deported should receive notice that they are subject to the act and an opportunity to have their removal reviewed by the federal court where they are being detained. Now here's the question going forward immediately. Will Donald Trump abide by this? So the Supreme Court just said, you can keep using the law, but you have to give them at least this modicum of due process. What if he doesn't? What if he keeps doing what he was doing? Because Donald Trump isn't smart enough to understand what the court just told him. He thinks this is a huge victory. So he probably thinks that he can keep doing exactly what he was doing. But will they do that? Because if they continue doing exactly what they have been doing, then they will be violating an order of the Supreme Court. In which case, if it was Justice Roberts' intention to avoid that, he will have failed spectacularly. Anyways, now, I don't want to read this whole CNN thing. Essentially, they get it right. But you wouldn't know that from just reading the headline. And that's the problem with a lot of media. If you read the article that they write, where there's more specifics, it doesn't actually match up with the message they convey in the headline. And as we know, many people just glance at the headline. They don't actually read the story. So if you read headlines and not the story, you're going to come away with a misunderstanding of what actually is going on. Now, to that point, there is no case of the headlines not matching the story any more glaring than Fox News. And they do this all the time. So I want to show you something from the Fox News website. Here's the home page at Fox News. And here's where the story is linked, here in the bottom right-hand corner. They write, Trump's promise back on track after judge tried to stop him from kicking out violent thugs. All right, is that really what's going on? It's kind of misleading now, isn't it? Now that you understand what's really going on here. Let's take a look at the article itself. Come on, there we go. Okay. Now, the headline here isn't even the same as the headline on the front page. Supreme Court grants Trump request to lift stay halting Venezuelan deportations. Justices on the High Court ruled 5-4 to grant the administration's request to lift the stay.
The Trump administration?
Shut the hell up. Grant the lift administration stay in a temporary victory for Trump and his allies. So this is what they do. They try to get it right, at least to a degree, in the stories themselves. But in the headlines, they give the Trump cult the headlines that they want to read. And they know. What percentage of the Trump cult who goes to Fox News is actually going to read any of these stories? I'm sure they have all the click-through information on their website, and they probably know the number of people who actually read the articles is really, really low. But this is their way of being able to say, well, we reported on the facts. Yeah, but you didn't in the headline, and you certainly don't in prime time on Fox. They do this on the the channel itself. They will get news stories correct during the day, like at 2 in the afternoon when no one's watching, except certain retirees who just sit there and watch 24 hours a day. Unfortunately, there's a lot of those people. But anyways, during the primetime lineup at night, when they get most of their audience, they don't report facts. It's just pure propaganda from like 5 o'clock on. But in the middle of the afternoon, they will report on facts. Anyway, back to this article. The Supreme Court on Monday granted President Donald Trump's request to vacate a lower court's ruling barring the administration from using a 1798 wartime immigration law to immediately deport Venezuelan nationals, including alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang from the U.S., marking a significant victory for the administration as it advances key immigration priorities. Again, is this really a significant victory? In what freaking way is this a significant victory? 1, it's temporary, and 2, you have to now start giving these people due process. which was the whole reason you were invoking this law in the first place, to avoid due process. So in what way is this a significant victory? It's a rhetorical victory at best. Anyway, let's continue here. Justices on the High Court ruled 5-4 to grant the administration's request to lift the stay in a temporary victory for Trump and his allies. At issue was the Alien Enemies Act, or the immigration law passed by Congress in 1789. Have I been saying 98? Oh, yeah, it was 98. See, here they have it 89, and then the paragraph before they have it 1798. So they did a typo. Prior to Trump's second White House term, it had been invoked just 3 times in U.S. history during the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. Lawyers for the Trump administration had argued the court to vacate, please bear with me by the way, I'm getting to the point, had urged the court to vacate the lower court ruling, arguing in a Supreme Court filing that the lower court orders rebuffed their immigration agenda, including their ability to protect the nation against foreign terrorist organizations and risk debilitating effects for delicate foreign negotiations. Today's a bad day to be a terrorist in the United States, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said in a video posted to X, adding that Trump was correct in using his authority on using the Alien Enemies Act to deport terrorists out of this country. Meanwhile, Attorney General Pam Bondi called the landmark decision a victory for the rule of law, adding that an activist judge in Washington, D.C., does not have the jurisdiction to seize control of President Trump's authority to conduct foreign policy and keep the American people safe. You know, this Pam Bondi, she lies about these cases more than anyone else. So she called this a landmark decision. How can it be a landmark decision when the court didn't even decide anything yet? This isn't a decision on the merits. This issue about whether Trump can use the Alien Enemies Act has not been decided yet. It's still being litigated. It's down at the district court level still. It still has to percolate its way up to the Supreme Court. This was just a temporary order. That's it. There's no landmark anything about this. This was an administrative procedural order. This is not a ruling on the issue. Of course, she knows this, but she's a liar. This is what she does. And then she says she calls it a victory for the rule of law, adding that an activist judge in Washington does not have the jurisdiction to seize control of President Trump's authority. So listening to her, you would think that the Supreme Court just endorsed Donald Trump's whole argument that the district court has no authority to even hear this case. That's not at all what they said. They didn't take the district court's ability away from them to decide this case. It's at the district court. The district court will decide this case. That's not at all what happened here. But this is what she does. She lies about virtually all of this. Nothing, let me put it this way. Nothing that anyone in this administration says is designed to inform the American people about anything they're doing. It's all propaganda designed, exclusively for the Trump cult audience on Fox News and elsewhere. That's what everything they say is designed for. It is designed to convince the Trump cult to believe a certain set of facts, to construct for them an alternate reality that doesn't actually have anything to do with the real reality. Anyway, and of course Fox News goes right along with this. And see, this is what they do too. They know that, I'm sure the people who wrote this article, I probably shouldn't make that assumption. Brianne Deppish, I don't have any idea who she is, but guess what she looks like? She's young and blonde. Shocker. Imagine that. That's the only qualification to get hired at Fox News. Anyways, I shouldn't make the assumption that they know any better. But the point is, they lie to their viewers simply by quoting administration officials. That's what they do. And they never correct them. So Fox News doesn't actually have to lie to their audience in these news stories. They just have to quote Pam Bondi. That's it. And not correct her. Not actually write about what the truth is. Just quote Pam Bondi as if what she said is a fact, with no actual reporting on whether or not what she said is true. This is what they do. This is why we live in a completely different universe from people who voted for Donald Trump, or most of them, the hardcore MAGA. You can't have a conversation with them because they literally believe that everything that you say is a lie, because they've been programmed to believe all this nonsense that they're constantly fed on Fox News. And almost none of that is actually true. So you can't actually have a conversation with them because you can't even agree on a common set of facts. And this is what's ripping the country apart. Anyway, I don't want to belabor this any longer. The point is, this was a temporary victory. I don't know what the court is ultimately going to do. Ultimately, the court should, Trump should lose big on all of this, but who the hell knows? What I think is what I said. Justice Roberts is going to try to craft, I think he's going to do this with a lot of cases going forward, try to craft a decision that gets largely to the right outcome, perhaps, especially on due process stuff, fundamental issues. I mean, John Roberts is going to get a lot of stuff wrong. This court's going to get a lot of stuff wrong because they're just inclined to do that. But on a lot of this fundamental stuff, separation of powers and fundamental due process rights, I think Roberts will try to craft opinions that ultimately get more or less to the right outcome, while giving Donald Trump at least a partial rhetorical victory, so that to try to prevent Donald Trump from just outright defying an order of the Supreme Court. That's what I think we're going to see a lot of over the next 4 years. I think maybe we saw that here, but the point is, this was a temporary victory at best, and really, it's kind of a loss for Donald Trump, because now these people, he can't just deport them. He can't just pick them up off the streets and send them to a prison camp in El Salvador. They have to have their day in court, and that's not what Trump wants. So it's kind of a loss, not a victory. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon.